Hey everybody, I had a request to talk about the great drummer Morey Feld. I'm very happy to do that. Morey Feld is one of my all-time favorite drummers. Just a great player, he had his own sound, his own style, just hard swinging. He had great technique, great hands. He had a variety, a mixture of interesting influences, and he was one of these players, and there were so many guys like this, just great players who had their own style, who played with all the greats, and who at one point, pretty much all musicians would know who these people were, but now they've kind of been forgotten, unfortunately. But Morey Feld is definitely someone who's worth checking out. Probably my favorite recording of his, and in fact just one of my favorite recordings of all time in general, is one that he made with Benny Goodman in 1954. Called Benny Goodman Live at Basin Street East. Morey Feld played with Benny Goodman off and on over many years. But this recording, I remember when I first heard it, the thing I was immediately struck by was Morey Feld's sound. He just has a great sound. He has this beautiful ride cymbal with rivets in it that he just has an incredible touch on. It just has the right amount of sustain. He used it a lot throughout his career. It's just a beautiful cymbal, and he really knew how to play it. Also, his bass drum sound. He played a very prominent four-to-the-bar bass drum, really coming out of guys like Gene Krupa, and Morey Feld kept that going through the 50s and 60s. It was really a part of his style. I think that's maybe one of the reasons he fit Benny Goodman so well. But he really plays that heavy bass drum, and his bass drum sound, it's a beautiful sound. It's a very low-pitched, flat, kind of thuddy sound, sort of like Dave Tuff would get sometimes, but just a beautiful sound. And I should mention the drums that he's playing on that recording are an interesting set of drums that were made for Morey Feld by Billy Gladstone. Billy Gladstone was a great snare drummer, worked for Radio City Music Hall, and a great musician, a great inventor. He invented things for drums and also things that had nothing to do with drums, and he built drums. He built drums for Gretsch. He also built drums on his own. He made, I think, around 50 snare drums, which are all very rare and valuable today, and he only made 4 drum sets. I think maybe only 2 of them still exist, but he made 4 drum sets, and he made one for Morey Feld. And that's what Morey Feld is playing on this live recording. It's a 14 by 22 inch bass drum, 16 by 16 and 9 by 13 toms, and I think a 6.5 by 14 snare drum, and there are wood hoops on the toms. It's just a beautiful sounding set. I think that set still exists today, and I think it's owned by the rock drummer Carl Palmer, but I'm not sure about that. But on this recording, you'll definitely hear this four-to-the-bar bass drum that he's playing. Again, it's very prominent in the mix. And he would do that at all tempos, even on up tempos. He would keep that strong four-to-the-bar bass drum going. And on this recording, he plays a lot with brushes. And a thing that he does on up tempos with brushes that a lot of guys back then did, he plays a lot of quarter notes with brushes. So instead of playing the ride rhythm, as we would often do, like, he's playing quarter notes instead of the ride rhythm. So he's playing, and he'll do that, and he'll keep that bass drum going, on very fast tempos, chorus after chorus, that four-to-the-bar bass drum going. It's very impressive. And then sometimes he would bring in the ride beat for just the last chorus, or maybe the last 8 bars or something. But at the end of the tune, he would switch from playing quarter notes to playing the ride cymbal rhythm with brushes, and that would sort of give it an extra level of excitement at the end of the tune. You can also hear Gene Krupa do that with Benny Goodman in the 30s in the small groups. And interestingly, the way that they would both do that a lot of the time, when they would go to that ride beat, instead of playing it with one hand and doing a sweep with the other hand, again, a sort of a standard thing, they would play it hand to hand, right, left, right. So like, so you can hear Morey Feld do that, and you can hear Gene Krupa do that. You can tell when they do it, it's a different kind of sound. It's subtle, but it's a different type of articulation, and of course they're not getting the sweep. It almost, I never really play that way, but it's an interesting thing. It almost gets into a little bit of a train beat, kind of like. But that's a way that they would do that, and again, it's just a different type of effect, a different type of sound. Another thing he would do with brushes, when he would take a solo, like let's say on some of those up-tempo tunes, he would do something again that makes me think of Gene Krupa. Morey Feld was very interesting because there's a lot of Gene Krupa in his playing, but also, you know, Morey Feld I think was about maybe a year younger than Kenny Clarke. So there's also some other influences in his playing, which I'll talk about, but it all comes together in this unique combination. So on some of those up-tempo tunes with brushes, when he would take a solo, he would play single strokes with different accents. And again, this is a thing you think of Gene Krupa doing. Morey Feld had his own way of doing it. So Gene Krupa, when he was doing that sort of thing, he would move the accents around a little more hand to hand. He would do things like and then Morey Feld, the accents would often fall more on the right hand, and of course he had the rivet cymbal, which Gene Krupa didn't have, so he would play sort of a similar thing, but in his own way. So he would do things like those are sort of some of the solo things he would do. I'll get more into the solo stuff later. I'm going to stick with things that he would play behind the band for now. Another thing you'll hear him do with brushes are these triplet fills. He loved triplet fills. He played them throughout his career, and usually with a right, left sticking. So what you'll hear him play are things like right, left. And that's a kind of fill that he would play a lot at a variety of tempos. And not just with brushes. He played that fill a lot with sticks, often on the hi-hat, something like you can hear him doing that on this recording from 1954. Also, he made some really classic recordings with Benny Goodman in the mid-40s. And on one of those slipped disc, you can also hear him doing that triplet fill on the hi-hat. And also it's interesting to point out that again, when he would play up-tempo tunes on the hi-hat, he would sometimes do the same thing that he did with brushes. Instead of playing it with one hand, he would play it hand to hand like this. And again, you can hear that there's just a sort of different articulation when he plays that. And again, another sort of link to Gene Krupa, if you hear the Gene Krupa recording of Lover with his big band from 1945, I believe, he plays a fast hi-hat intro, and he played it the same way with that hand-to-hand sticking. One of my favorite tunes on that Benny Goodman Live at Basin Street East is Don't Be That Way. And it's a great example of lots of cool things that Morey Feld could do. First of all, he plays the first 4 choruses all on the hi-hat. And with every different thing that happens in the music, he gets a slightly different sound out of the hi-hat. So for the first chorus, which is the melody, he's playing open and closed hi-hat. Then for the second chorus, there's a piano solo, and he plays closed hi-hat. And then Benny Goodman has a 2-chorus solo, and he plays a half-open hi-hat for Benny. He doesn't go to the ride cymbal until the 5th chorus, when Charlie Shavers comes in. I should point out this recording, some of it is a trio with Benny Goodman, Morey Feld, and Mel Powell on piano, and then some of it is a larger group with Charlie Shavers, Steve Jordan, and Israel Crosby. So on Don't Be That Way, it's so cool what he does because the way he paces it, he waits to go to the ride cymbal until the fifth chorus, so when he goes to it, it really has an effect because he's saved it for so long. And then those four choruses on the hi-hat, just all the different sounds that he gets. This is another thing you can hear him do throughout his career, just staying on the hi-hat, but getting these subtly different sounds, and that's another great effect and a great lesson. And actually going into the piano solo, he does something that again is sort of one of his trademark things that he would do now and then, and another link to Gene Krupa, because Krupa would do this also. It's playing an accent on the bass drum, a downbeat on the bass drum, but without reinforcing it with a cymbal or playing anything else with it. So on Don't Be That Way, going into the second chorus piano solo, he plays something like this. And that bass drum all by itself, you don't hear that a lot. Usually you play a bass drum, there's a cymbal with it or something, and having that bass drum all by itself really kind of stops everything for a split second, and it sort of says, okay, now here's something new. And it's a great effect. It's the kind of thing that if you did it too much, I don't think it would be good, because it's too dramatic. It just sort of stops things. If you did it a lot, you'd be kind of stopping and starting. But again, Morey Feld or Gene Krupa, they had great taste, and if you pick the right time to do something like that, which they always did, it's a really great effect. So listen for where he puts that and how often or how rarely he does stuff like that. All of these things I'm showing, these are just examples, but he would play all this stuff very sparingly and with great taste. So definitely check out where he puts these things in. And then another thing that you'll hear him play there, a little variation of the triplet fills that he liked to play. And this is, if he was playing on the hi-hat or the ride cymbal, playing the triplets on the snare drum with his left hand, just the second two notes of the triplet, something like this. And that sort of thing is something that I would definitely think of. Max Roach or Art Blakey would do that kind of thing a lot. In fact, elsewhere on that recording, I think on 1 O'Clock Jump, Morey Feld even plays that, moving it back and forth between the snare drum and the tom-tom. So, and that's definitely a Max Roach thing and guys like that. Like I said, I think Morey Feld was probably influenced by those guys, but what's so cool about it is that he makes it his own. That thing, even though it's the exact same thing, if you saw it written out, it's the same thing. He doesn't sound like Max Roach when he plays it, because he has his own sound, he has his own feel, he's got that bass drum going, and he took these things and he really made it his own. That's what's so cool. It's not like he doesn't sound like a swing drummer for 6 bars and then a bebop drummer for 2 bars. There's none of that. He just sounds like Morey Feld through the whole thing. He's able to take things from Gene Krupa or maybe Art Blakey or these different people and put them together. And it just sounds like Morey Feld, and it just works perfect with Benny Goodman, or he also played with Eddie Condon, with Bobby Hackett, Wee Erwin, with Yank, Lawson, and Bob Haggart. And with all of these guys, he just fits in perfectly. All of his influences come together into this beautiful swinging style. Another thing he would do that, again, I think more of Max Roach and Art Blakey, are these different offbeat bass drum accents that he would play. Things like, again, you think of those types of guys for that sort of thing, but he makes it his own. He has his own sound, and it doesn't sound like them. It sounds like him, and that's, I think, a really great lesson to take away from Morey Feld and other players like that who really had their own style. So I think maybe I'll finish this in another part because there's a lot to talk about, and I want to talk more about things he would play in solos because he has some very interesting solo ideas. But definitely check out that Benny Goodman live at Basin Street East, and also the things that he did with Benny in the mid-40s. I mentioned Slipped Disc, also Rachel's Dream. All of that stuff is great. In the next one, I'll recommend some more recordings. He recorded a ton with a lot of different people, so these are just some of my favorites. But check out the stuff with Benny Goodman. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll do another one about Morey Feld soon. I have some planned. Someone had asked for more about Cozy Cole, which I'm happy to do, and I have some other ideas. So if there's anything you'd like to see, let me know. I'll try to do it, and I'll see you soon. Thanks a lot.